Thank you very much, Mr. Bazalia. Our last speaker is Mr. Basheer Nafi. Mr. Nafi is a senior researcher at Al Jazeera Center for Studies. He's a professor at University of London. He has numerous articles and books regarding political Islam, Turkey, and the Middle East. And he also focuses on Palestinian question and produced several documentaries. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jan. Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm only a Syrian in a greater Syrian sense, which is, of course, a great idea, but I don't think it's very realistic at the moment. And so I don't represent here any party, and I would like to speak on behalf of you rather than any of the major forces interested in the Syrian crisis. Let me just start by saying that I believe there was a greater chance in the beginning of the Syrian revolution that the situation in Syria, that political change could have been achieved in Syria in a very short period of time and without a great deal of losses. Something perhaps not as a shorter period as the change was achieved in Tunisia and Egypt, but maybe it would have taken like 2 or 3 months to bring about a kind of rational political transformation of the country. However, that did not happen. We know now it didn't happen, and perhaps the Syrian crisis is going to take some time to be resolved, and the consequences will most likely be extremely drastic for the Syrian people, for the Arab and the Muslim people in the region, and perhaps for the whole international situation. What really happened is that the Syrian revolution gradually is being transformed from a domestic issue into a regional issue, and eventually into an international crisis. The main reason, and that's where I'm going to focus, and very briefly, the main reason behind the prolongation of the Syrian crisis and this huge transformation of a domestic issue into an international question, I think are 4 main elements. The first one, of course, is the elements of the so-called Sunni Arab revival and the fear which is Sunni Arab revival creating within Syria and outside Syria. The second is the Russian factor. The third is the Iranian factor. And the fourth is the lack of an overall strategy on the part of all involved, including the National Council, the Turkey, the Arab League, and Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states. And let me just make a few comments about each of these elements. I believe that the present system, the present political system in the Middle East, of course, as we all know, came into existence after the First World War. For the past century, since the First World War, the Arab countries in particular being ruled by minorities. Minorities not in a sectarian sense only, but minorities in a political sense and in the social sense. In the interwar period, the ruling elites came from within the second, third generation of formal Ottoman notables family, intelligentsia, sons of big families, of urban families who received modern education in the late Ottoman period, played a very important role in the relationship between the state in the central Istanbul and the Arab provinces, and it gradually came to play a very important role during the colonial period, during the imperialist domination of the Middle East period, and emerged to control the independent states for a while, for a very short period of time. Then we have minority governments which came from within the military, socialist military elements, Arab nationalist military elements, and even sometimes like a fascist Nazi sort of military elements. We have monarchic minority ruling group as well. Now, what really happened during the last 10, 15 years, that the minority, we have also, of course, sectarian rules. We have, there is no doubt, although I tend to believe that sectarian regimes, which are usually identified as sectarian, like for example, the Syrian regime, like the emergent Iraqi regime, they don't really represent the sects. They seem to use the sects from which they emerge, rather than representing them in a democratic fashion. So, what really happened in the last 10, 15 years is that minority rule in the Middle East is exacerbating. For the first time in the last 100 years, the ruling elites are not satisfied by only controlling the power of the state and creating a kind of total identification between the state instrument and the government and the regime, but also they are controlling the wealth of the country. The same people who are in charge of the intelligence, who are in charge of presidency, who are in charge of ministries, they are at the same time. I mean, for example, the last government of Hosni Mubarak had got 16 very big names of the Egyptian business elite. The president's son, Jamal Mubarak, he was very much connected with the business group within the countries. I mean, people who control major companies and major sectors of the Egyptian economy were at the same time ministers of economy, minister of finance, minister of transport. We know that a very small group of people in Syria, they are dominating the economic and business sectors, major business and economic sectors within Syria. So this situation, I believe, is the main reason behind what we call now the Arab Spring, behind this huge wave of Arab revolution. We are coming to the end of the road for the minority rule, which control minority, the political minorities, the social minorities, the sectarian minorities, which dominated and control governments and states in the Middle East. Of course, Turkey managed to go into the minority role in 1950, but Turkish democracy has been struggling for the last half a century until the coming of the AK party to power. And it will take Arab states, of course, some time before the rule of the majority is being asserted. Now, what's really the situation is this: the Arab Sunnis are the majority bloc in this region, and when you speak about the coming of the majority rule, you are talking about the coming of the Arab Sunni minority. But we will have perhaps to take into consideration that first, the Sunnis have a very all-embracing view of Islam. And secondly, political Islam, which Mr. Popov highlighted the issue of political Islam in terms of the relationship within the country and relationship between the Arab region and the West. I think political Islam is a very changing phenomenon. And political Islam in the 1970s is not political Islam in the 1980s, and it's not political Islam which is perhaps coming to power in some countries, as we saw, for example, in Tunisia or in Egypt, or perhaps if situation change in Syria, we have kind of political Islamic element within the government. These are not the same people. The Muslim brothers are not the Muslim brothers of the 1950s and the 1960s. They are becoming democratic forces to a great extent, and they are learning from becoming involved in the real political world. However, this so-called, when you talk, of course, about Sunni revival, you include Turkey in it. When you talk about Arab Sunni revival, you talk about exclusively about the Arab world. Whatever we think of this phenomenon, whatever we as academics may explain it, it is creating a fear. It is creating a fear among Muslim minority groups. It is creating a fear among the Alawis, perhaps smaller extent among the Druze, among the Shiite, and it is certainly creating some fear among the Christian minorities in Greater Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria itself, and perhaps also in Egypt. And this is one of the issues. I know in the afternoon we will talk a little bit more about issues of policy and strategies, so I'm going to leave that to the afternoon. The second factor is the Russian factor. Of course, there is overlapping dimensions between the Russian position and the Iranian position. The Russians, of course, spoke about international law, respect for international law, etc. when they took position against the Western and the Arab proposals in the Middle East Security Council. I tend to believe that the great powers don't really abide by international law. They use international law. And like international laws, of course, they are like any other set of laws. They are open to interpretations. And when the interpretation serves the interest of a certain power, it is being respected and it is involved. When it is not, I think it will be overlooked. The Georgian crisis, of course, a few years ago is a very major example of this. I think the main reason behind the Russian position in Syria is that Russia has lost leveraging power in the war. And I mean, a lot of people are talking about the Russians talking to the Americans about issues of conflict and of interest in Georgia, about the anti-ballistic missile defense system in Europe. I believe that perhaps these issues are involved, but the main reason is Syria has been like a gift from heaven for Russia to reassert itself in the international scene. Is again to reaffirm Russian role in the international relational system. The problem, of course, if someone, certain sectors in Russia want to make out of Syria like a kind of small Cold War, the problem is the Syrian issue is not like the invasion of Cuba in the 1960s, or even the invasion of Iraq in 2003. There isn't like a regional conspiracy which being plotted in Saudi Arabia or Turkey. I mean, we all know is what really happened in Syria is that the Syrian people, at a certain moment, thought that Syria can also change the way Egypt changed, the way Tunisia it changed. Most of the regional and Arab interested parties did not really formulate a very clear position in Syria until much later. I mean, we know, for example, that in Turkey, the Turkish position is not a change into demanding a total transformation of, in Syria until perhaps after the Turkish Foreign Minister visit to Damascus in mid-August. Okay. The Iranian element is very similar to the Iranian factor is very similar to the Russian factor. Iran is speaking about the role Syria played against the Israeli expansion and against Western influence in the region. But I believe that there is also a kind of sectarian element in the Iranian position in Syria, which will have to be taken into consideration. We don't like it, but it is a real thing. What seems to appear is that Iran have put its trust in the Syrian regime, not in the Syrian people. And Iran seems to forget that the Syrian people played a very important role in the Palestinian question from the 1920 onward. It's like the Russians seem to forget that it was the Shukr-Quwatli's government in the 1950s, the so-called liberal 1950s government, which started the relationship with the Soviet Union, and since then relations between Syria and Russia, the Soviet Union and Russia, really did not fundamentally change. Syria always had a view of itself which is different from other countries in the region. And I believe that even if Basma Khadmani and Burhan Al-Yun and Jamal Khan and others came to power, I don't think that very much will change. Of course, maybe on a smaller scale, there will be some changes in terms of relationship between New Syria and Western countries, but not fundamental. Syria needs to have a kind of relationship with various powers to fulfill its aspiration of playing a kind of role in the region. The fourth element, of course, is the lack of an overall strategy. We all know, of course, that revolutionary movements are unpredictable. But sometimes we seem to forget that also the dynamics of the revolutions are unpredictable. And that's really, in the beginning, most of the forces involved believed that a kind of rational, peaceful transformation will be some Turkish pressure, some Saudi pressure, some Qatari pressure will eventually bring about a change in Syria. That, of course, did not happen, and not the Americans, not the French, not the Turks, not the Saudis, not the Arab League had any strategic view of the situation or thought of developing a strategy of how to deal with very complex, evolving situation in Syria. And perhaps we're just now beginning to see something of an overall strategy developing. Where Syria is going to go from here, I think now it is time to the romantic view of our revolution is coming to an end. Revolutions, all historians know revolutions are very messy affairs, and sometimes are extremely bloody affairs. The situation in Syria will be chaotic for a while, a bit messy. Maybe we will see quite a bit of bloodshed, and the region, situation in the region will be fluid for a while. Maybe it will take about 4, 5, 6 years until we can see a new system emerging in the region. Thank you very much.